Good evening. As you can see, the snow has kept us out of class. What I do want to do is go over chapter 5. I know I started it on Tuesday, but I want to go ahead and finish this. The test has been moved to February 25th. There will be chapters 4 and 5. So let's get started. First things first, the integumentary system, which we know is a big word for talking about the skin. So let's talk about the functions of the integumentary system. I know on the next slide I only put 3 functions, but I actually want to break those down into 6 and make them very, very specific. So the first one would be to regulate body temperature. And we know that from looking at chapter 1. If the body gets too hot, we're going to sweat to cool down the body temperature. If it's extremely cold, we're going to shiver using the erecti pili, which is the smooth muscle. So we're going to take in conjunction the integumentary as well as the smooth muscle to generate heat. Number 2, this is a huge area for storage of blood. They have this system has a very, very elaborate network of blood vessels. They carry about 8 to 10% of total blood flow in adults. So that's a lot of blood flow for just one specific system. Number 3, we're going to protect the body from external environment. And the way the body is protected from the external environment is through certain conditions. For example, the skin is acidic. And because it's acidic, it is not a prime place for reproduction or growth for bacteria or fungus. Even though some bacteria are able to grow, but the majority of them are not able to because of the acidity of our skin. We also have oil on our skin, which is going to inhabit that, as well as melanin. The next one I want to do, number 4, is how the integumentary system detects cutaneous sensations. And pretty much what that's saying is that it's going to detect vibrations, touch, and pressure. So when you're in the car at the stoplight and your body starts to vibrate because the car that's coming down the street is playing extremely loud music and your body's vibrating, or whether it be someone touches you or pushes you, you can actually feel that sensation. Or if the wind blows by and it makes the hairs on your neck stand up, that is all because of the sensations that are being detected in this organ system. Number 5, the integumentary system excretes carbon dioxide, so it gets rid of carbon dioxide because we know that's a waste. It also wants to absorb certain substances such as vitamin A, vitamin D, vitamin E, and vitamin K. The last function of the integumentary system, of course, is to synthesize vitamin D, and as we go through this slideshow, I'll go into more depth about what it does. Now, the skin we know is a cutaneous membrane. The outer surface is completely covered. It's the largest organ in the body, surface area and weight being considered. It has 2 main parts, the superficial or the epidermis and the deep layer, which is the dermis. So first let's talk about the epidermis. So the epidermis is the outermost layer of skin, of course, meaning that it is the superficial layer. It's composed of keratinized, stratified squamous epithelium. Anytime we see the word keratinized, we know it's going to be an area where it becomes resistant to friction, any type of pressure or abrasions. That's why you usually will see keratinized surfaces on the palms and the soles of the feet. That keratin is what we're actually scraping off of our hands and the soles of our feet, because when they start getting very sensitive and the skin starts to see that, okay, hey, this area is being heavily rubbed, you will actually start seeing some keratin form there for protection. Stratified, again from chapter 4, meaning there's going to be at least 2 layers of cells. So stratified is going to be 2 layers of cells. Squamous, for epithelium, and all of this is just going to describe what it looks like. Stratified, 2 rows, squamous, in a square shape. This is also an avascular region, and what that means is there is not a blood supply here. So if you cut off any of those areas, your calluses or the calluses or the dead skin on the bottom of your feet, you are not going to bleed. Now, the epidermis can be divided into 5 layers, and a way to remember this in order is come let's grow some berries. So the corneum being the very top layer, and as you can see, it has tons of keratinocytes, and these are what usually will form your calluses, and the very bottom layer being the stratum basal. Stratum basal is also very important because it has stem cells there, and we know that stem cells can be used to differentiate into other cells depending on the environment. So if we go in order, so we have the stratum corneum, which is the top layer, and then we have the strata lucidum, which is very important. This you will also find a lot of keratin here, but it's also found on hairless thick skin areas and your fingertips. Very important. Note, start, write it down that this is found in areas like your fingertips and the palms of your hand and the bottom of your feet. So lucidum, very important to find in your fingertips. Strata granulosum, this is where apoptosis goes, and remember, apoptosis is programmed cell death. So these keratinocytes that are no longer functional, we're going to make sure that they are disposed of. The strata spinosum are Langerhans cells are important and found here, and we'll go into what the Langerhans cells actually are, and they are a part of the immune system, and what they do is pretty much mark anything that is foreign to help it get rid of the cells or bacteria or virus that does not belong. And melanocytes, we'll get into those as well, and melanocytes deal with melanin, which is pigment. Okay, so if we look at this, we can see the stratum corneum at the top. You can see it's very thick, about 20 to 30 layers, extremely thick. Then you see the stratum lucidum, which again is in your fingertips. Stratum granulosum is where we're going to see that cell apoptosis or that cell death. Stratum spinosum is where we're going to see the keratinocytes. We'll also find the Langerhans cells here and the melanocytes. And of course, the stratum basum, as you can see, it's very close to the basement membrane, which is where we're going to find our basal cells. And remember, your basal cells are pretty much your stem cells, so they can differentiate to many different things. So let's look at those specialized cells. So the keratinocytes produce keratin. It's a very tough fibrous protein. So if we think about chapter 4, and we were talking about how fiber is very tough, it looks pretty much like rope. It's very impact resistant. It also produces a water repellent sealant. Very good. It's found in hair and nails, and about 90% of all cells in the epidermis are keratinocytes. The melanocytes will, of course, produce melanin, and we can have melanin from a yellow-red color to a brown-black pigment. They absorb UV. They shield the DNA. Very important for that. We don't want our DNA damaged. Langerhans cells, again, come from the red bone marrow, and they aid in immune responses. So they will recognize and mark a microbe, anything foreign that does not belong there, and tell the dendritic cells or tell the immune system, hey, this does not belong, it needs to be taken out. The Merkel cells are deep in the epidermis, but they do detect touch sensation. Very important that they detect that. Okay, now the dermis. The dermis is actually the deep layer. The dermis, let's see, it's the very deep part of the skin. As you can see, this is dense, irregular tissue. Looks like paisley. Some people will say paisley. depending on what you look at. So again, this is a review from chapter 4. They have, when you see a purse or if you see any type of leather bag, what you're looking at is the dermis. So belts, shoes are all made from the dermis of animals. So look at your boots or wallets. That's what you're wearing, some animal's dermis. Now, blood vessels are found here, so if you cut down to the dermis, you will bleed. You will bleed. You also find nerve endings here, glands, hair follicles. So when you start talking about people ending up with third-degree burns, we're burning down. We're burning down to the dermis where the nerves are. Second-degree burn, we're burning down to where the dermis is. Okay. All right, now with the dermis, we can break it down since we know it is vascular, again, meaning that it is going to have a blood supply. The dermis, which I can say is it's stretchy and it does recoil easily. It's really thick. It does have a lot of collagen present. But we can divide it into two regions. The very thin region, which is the papillary region. It contains mesenteric corpuscles, and those have your nerve endings. As we just talked about, one of the characteristics that the dermis has is that it does have nerve endings, and it's very sensitive to touch. So it gives rise to tickling, pain, coolness, and itching. So any of those things that you feel, you know that is coming from the dermis, more specifically the thin layer, which is the papillary region. Now the reticular region is very thick with collagen, pretty much layered with tons of collagen. Right here you'll see blood vessels again, hair follicles, sebaceous glands, which we'll go into, sudoriferous glands, collagen fibers, and the collagen fibers are present here for elasticity, and we see that in pregnancy and obesity. And the reason that I bring up the pregnancy and the obesity is because most of the times we will talk about stretch marks. And what stretch marks are, stretch marks occur in the dermis layer. And what happens is pretty much that dermis layer has been torn. So there's some type of internal damage to that dermis layer. The blood vessels will rupture, so they start off with a little pinkish blue color, and then later on, once the blood dissipates and moves out, it becomes a white color. Usually what causes stretch marks is rapid growth, or weight changes, pregnancy. It could be hormones. As of now, treatments that they try to do for stretch marks, it may be they will try to use a laser to get rid of it. There are some creams that claim to reduce stretch marks or lighten stretch marks. My sister swore by petroleum jelly. A lot of times you'll see things like cocoa butter, to use Palm's cocoa butter to reduce stretch marks. So it just depends on how your body acts, but no one specifically can say that they have a cure for it. So some of you may have used various things. Another fun note, because I know these regions start to get, these two chapters are a little dry, so I like to add in something that kind of will, say, oh, okay, maybe I get it. That's a fun little note. Is that epidermal regions, very important. They're very unique. They're passed through genetics. So the way that you get pretty much your fingerprints and footprints, of course, some variation comes from your parents. Excuse me about that notice. So they're mixed with sweat glands. So the ridges are mixed with sweat glands, and that's how you get fingerprints and footprints, which is what we do, of course, when those darling babies are first born. That's the first thing that we want to do. Okay. Let's see. Moving on to the next slide. Let's see if I can show you a picture. So here's the papillary up here. And you see the reticular, of course, is much thicker down here compared to the two. We have a lot more substance down here than we do up here. I want to talk more about melanin and the importance of it. So melanin, of course, is going to cause the skin color to vary from pale yellow to reddish brown to black. Two that I want to talk about specifically is pheomelanin. Pheomelanin is a yellow to red color, or pheomelanin. It depends on how you say it, but it's pheomelanin, has a yellow to red color, or eumelanin, which is a brown to black color, and that is found in hair. So when we pull, you combing your hair, brushing your hair, and you see the hair in the brush, you're looking at a eumelanin type of melanin, because that's why that hair is brown to black. Now, melanocytes are more formed and found in the epidermis. We saw them more so when we were looking at the 5 different regions. We saw the melanocytes, we saw the melanocytes in the 5 different regions. What we also will see, melanocytes, of course, are going to be anywhere where there's some dark color or dark pigmentation. So you will see them in the penis, the nipple, and the areola area where you'll see there's a real darkness. You'll also see freckles. Many of us have seen people with freckles. All of us have seen them. Some of us may have freckles. And all it is melanin just accumulating together in patches. So anyone that has freckles, they just have a bunch of melanocytes grouped together in one. Moles is an overgrowth of melanocytes. Too many melanocytes in one area. But most of the times moles are benign, meaning they are non-cancer causing. You may have seen people who are albino, who have albinism, and what that is their melanocytes are not producing any melanin. So you won't see it in their eyes, nor their eyelashes, eyebrows, hair, skin, of course, nails. You won't see any color. Vitiligo will be certain areas are missing melanocytes. One of the biggest people I think that we know about with that had vitiligo was Michael Jackson, and one of the things that they came out later and said he did end up bleaching his skin so he could hurry along the process. So that was vitiligo. All right, now let's move into hair. Now, hair is present on most surfaces. Places you're not going to see it is your palms, the sole of your feet, your lips on your face, the labia minora on females, and the glans penis, or the head of the penis, of course, on males. So each hair cell is made up of columns of dead keratinized epidermal cells. So again, we're seeing that word keratin. It is very, very prominent in this unit. Okay. Now, the function of hair, many people say, what is the purpose of having hair? And it's pretty much to provide protection. If you think about your eyebrows and your eyelashes and nasal hair, they all provide protection. Of course, our eyebrows are going to, our eyebrows are going to protect us, of course, from sweat. Eyelashes, anything that may come in contact with the eye, mucus, or anything that doesn't belong there, your eyelashes are pretty much going to catch it and allow you to move it out of the way. Nasal hair, we know, provides protection because it's going to catch debris as we're breathing in as well as breathing out. Important to know the parts of the hair. So we have the shaft, the portion of the hair which appears above the surface of the skin. The root, that's what penetrates deep into the dermis. And remember, your dermis area is where you're going to have blood vessels, as well as you're going to have nerve ending. So when your hair falls out by the root, or someone pulls it out by the root, it becomes very, very painful, because it's not just the surface area, it's coming straight from the dermis. Follicle, very important again, surrounds the root and is made up of the external and internal root sheath. The bulb is an onion shape, looks just like a tulip bulb, and a papilla is a nipple shaped indentation. And with every cell that we talk about, everything has to have one particular cell or one particular area in that system that's going to provide nutrients, because everything is going to require nutrients to continue to grow. Make sure you look at the structures in the lab book on how to label parts of the hair. Another one that I always talk about since chapter 1 is the erecti pili. Here it is. It's a smooth muscle that gives you goosebumps and makes your hair stand up, especially when you're shivering or cold. Sometimes if you're nervous, but most of the time for being shivers or cold. But if you can see the structure, here's the hair bulb, like the little tulip ball at the bottom. And as you go up, you see the hair follicle here. And you continue to go up and you will see the root and the shaft at the top. Okay. Now, let's move on to the exocrine glands that have integumentary system. Before we talked about in chapter 4, we talked about exocrine and endocrine glands. And endocrine glands we will talk about much later in 169. Exocrine glands are always going to use a duct, and because they use a duct, they may not be as powerful because, as stated before in chapter 4, it may reabsorb a substance, or it may reabsorb it, or it will trickle it out. It won't be to its greatest power because it's going to kind of seep out. It's not going to go directly into the bloodstream. All right, so let's start with them. Now, sebaceous, with the integumentary system, we're going to have 3 main glands: sebaceous, sudoriferous, and ceremonous. So sebaceous is the oil glands, of course. Sudoriferous, sweat glands, and ceremonous are the sweat glands that produce earwax. And ceruminous. Okay, ceruminous is the sweat glands that produce earwax. So sebaceous glands are simple branched glands. Remember, we talked about this before in chapter 4. You see the branching here. Now, sebaceous glands are usually connected to hair follicles. They secrete sebum, which prevents drying out of the skin. So very, very important that this is where our oil glands are found. They're pretty much found everywhere except the palms again and the soles of your feet. This area is also considered to be waterproof. Sudoriferous glands release sweat through the pores. There are 2 main types. You have your eccrine and your apocrine. So your eccrine function after birth. They function after birth. They produce water and salt. So what they do is lower the body temperature. They regulate the body temperature through evaporation. You go outside, you're running, and you start sweating. The eccrine gland is going to allow you to sweat, and then once you start sweating, evaporation will pull that sweat from your skin, and that removes heat. Now, your apocrine gland, I think, is the most interesting. It comes into function after puberty. So before puberty, you never see this. It's found in your axillary areas as well as your pubic regions. So what happens is this gland produces sweat here with no odor. But when it's mixed with bacteria, that's when you get the body odor. If you can think about your children when you started to smell them and know when they needed deodorant, I'll never forget. I woke up. I had to have been maybe 9, 10, and I woke up and my sister came in the room and she was giving me something, and I raised my arms and she said, "Oh my goodness, Santa Claus is going to need to give you deodorant for Christmas." So from then, I understood that those were my apocrine glands. I had gone through, or was starting the process of going through puberty, and because of that, the bacteria and the sweat glands were mixing together, and that creates a body odor. Okay, so you'll also see with your apocrine gland emotional sweating. So if you get nervous in nervous settings, let's say for an interview or to do a presentation or meeting someone, someone you're attracted to, this is the gland that's going to produce that sweat. This is also the gland that produces sweat during sex. So anytime that you're engaging in sex or sexual activities, this the apical gland will be in effect. So you won't see the apical gland, but the apocrine. Okay. Next slide. The cerumen here, if you look at, all right, I see I missed a letter, but this should be the cerumen. So the cerumen produces a waxy lubricating substance. This is only seen in the auditory canal, meaning this is only seen, of course, in the entrance to the ear canal. So this is going to provide ear wax, which we know is very, very important because it provides a barrier from things going inside of there. Any type of bacteria will actually get caught in this area, so it will not go all the way through. So it becomes very sticky. You are supposed to collect some of that out, but you only are supposed to do it just with a washcloth. They are against using Q-tips. I know a lot of us have used Q-tips for ourselves or for our children, and they'll always say that it's very dangerous because you could actually puncture down here. You can actually puncture the eardrum. So just collecting right here is just fine. All right. Make sure you go through the nails. Nails are very, very important. Hard, dead, keratinized epidermal cells that form a clear covering part on the digits. So make sure you're able to label the free edge, the nail body, the cuticle, the nail root, the epidermis and the dermis. Okay, and the fingertips we know mix with your so we know if we're looking here for fingerprints or footprints, we know that that is your epidermal region, which is your sweat glands mixed with this epidermal region right here. And that's will give us fingerprints, and also it will give us footprints. And no two people have the same exact fingerprints, so that is pretty awesome. All right, so just going through and make sure you can identify the different areas of the nail body, the free edge, nail root, lanula, the nail bed, and the cuticle. Okay. Now, the subcutaneous layer, some people will not consider that a real layer because before I said there were only two layers. There was the epidermis, the superficial region, or the dermis, which is the deep layer. But when you're looking at a diagram, what you'll actually find is that the subcutaneous layer or the hypodermis layer actually sits below the dermis layer. And what you'll find usually here is areolar and adipose tissue. Okay, so adipose is a nice way for saying fat. So it's fat deposits, and of course we're going to have large blood vessels because this is in the below the dermis layer. It's not a part of the skin, but it's below the dermis layer. And we know the dermis layer has it has nerves, and it's also going to have blood vessels. Okay, the skin's role in calcium absorption. This is the part I really want to make sure it's clear. So when we're talking about skin calcium, we're going to talk about vitamin D. So we know vitamin D is a steroid. Very, very important because we need vitamin D for your health. So you can have healthy, strong bones and teeth. So if you don't have enough vitamin D, you're looking at bones that are going to break easily. So the way that we get this vitamin D and how the integumentary system plays a role in that, we're going to go through the steps. And this is a slide I just added, so this one is a little different. Well, it's different from your PowerPoint because you don't have this one. So what happens is we have the stratum basal and the stratum spinosum, okay? Those are the layers of the epidermis, and they contain a sterol, not a steroid, but a sterol that is called 7-dehydrocholesterol. Okay, now when UV light that comes from the sun or from tanning beds, depending on what you like to do, when it strikes the skin, when it actually strikes the skin, it's going to penetrate the outer layers of the epidermis. And once that light, those UV rays penetrate that layer of the epidermis, it's going to strike some of those molecules of the 7-dehydrocholesterol. Once it does that, that 7-dehydrocholesterol is going to be converted to vitamin D3. And once vitamin D3 is converted, once it's converted into vitamin D3, it then goes into the kidneys. And the kidneys have a final say so, and they turn it into something called calcitrol. And what calcitrol is the active form of vitamin D, which is the form of vitamin D that our bodies can actually use to strengthen our teeth, to strengthen our bones, to make sure that everything is healthy and strong. Okay. Next part, epidermal wound healing. So, of course, we're talking about the epidermis. Now, this can be repaired in two ways. Your common epidermal wounds are abrasions. You know, when you fall as a kid, you may scrape your hand, but there's no blood. If you do scrape and there's blood, you know you've hit the dermis. Um, so, abrasions and minor burns, which are those first-degree burns, they have a little tingling inside. Finger turns red, but that's about it. Kind of goes away. So what happens is once the injury occurs, whether it's on the palm of your hand or on your fingertips, what happens is the basal cells are affected. And we see that the basal cells are in the stratum basal. Okay, that's where all the basal cells are, because basal cells are just stem cells that can differentiate into different cells. So what's going to happen is once that injury occurs, there's going to be a signal through the body that's going to tell the cells to migrate, like, hey, there was an injury, we need to move to the site. It's going to strike a growth factor to say, hey, push the button, we need to stimulate more basal stem cells, because the more we replace, the more we continue to get to divide, the more we can take to that area, and that area will heal pretty quickly. Okay, so those will, like with those abrasions, you don't really need band-aids, they heal pretty quickly. Now the opposite happens when we start getting into the deep wound healing. We need tons and tons of help with this one. So this one has quite a few steps. So if we look at deep wound healing, what happens? So we have something called the inflammatory phase. What the inflammatory phase does is you cut your finger. Once you cut your finger, you're bleeding out. Once you cut deep enough, so we're cutting deep enough that we're hitting dermis, so we're bleeding out. Usually what you do is you usually press on your finger to try to get your blood to clot, which we're going to see are our platelets. Remember, the platelets were part of the formed elements that we talked about with connective tissue, which was blood. So our platelets are going to form to, of course, stop that actual blood from continuing to flow. Once that happens, white blood cells are going to come in. The reason the white blood cells are going to come in and start eating away at the pathogen or microbes is because, remember I said there are some bacteria that sit on the skin that can survive the acidity and the oil and the melanocytes. Well, as soon as that injury occurs, they're like, yes, we have an entryway. And because they have an entryway, they get into the body. So we have to ship the white blood cells out there to say, hey, that's not going to happen. We need to destroy anything that does not look like us. Now, once that part happens, we go into the migratory phase. And that's when that clot is going to become a scab. Once it becomes a scab, all of the epithelial cells are going to migrate and beneath the scab. The reason they're going to migrate, think about those basal cells from the those basal cells are going to come in and they're going to sit under there because they're going to want to replace more cells there, so when that scab comes off, we have a new set of skin cells sitting under there. Okay, the next part is the granulation phase. Granulation phase involves collagen and glycoproteins. If we talked about before, collagen is very fibrous, is very, very strong. So we want to put the structure back in place so that under those cells we have some strength that'll hold it together. Proliferative phase, of course, we want more and more epithelial cells to grow. We want them to continue to grow and to grow and to grow. You notice if you skin your knee, you'll see very pinkish tissue, and that's all new cells, very, very new cells, new tissue. This is the proliferative phase. Once everything is set in place and everything has grown to the extent it needs to be, we go to the maturation phase, and that's when the scab falls off. Hopefully we don't pluck it off before it is time for it to come off. Okay. Another very interesting case in the epidermal or the just integumentary system are keloids. Fibrosis, let's start there, is scar tissue formation. So you may have heard of people that say they may have fibroids in their uterus. All they're talking about is there is scar tissue present. So hypertrophic scar, meaning there is hyper meaning a lot, trophic meaning large. So there's a large scar that remains in the same area. So here we can see that is a hypertrophic scar. Now, a keloid scar goes beyond its normal surroundings. And what you would normally find is that keloid occurs more so in African Americans and people of color. They're not sure exactly why, and not all African Americans keloid. It's just certain people, depending on their genetic types, and they're still doing research on this, why some people keloid and some do not. Some people brand themselves from being in fraternities and their skin will keloid. Some people go for piercings and they keloid, and some people actually will just have 3 or 4 little keloids around their earlobe. I was talking to one lady who said she's been born with keloids her entire life. She just continuously to have them removed. Okay, the inflammatory response. Now, I included a video. I know the music, it sounds like club music in the beginning, but it's a very, very good video. Excellent, excellent video. So what the inflammatory response is, it's very non-specific. So what it is we're pretty much going to throw the entire kitchen sink at the problem because we don't have time to figure out what specific cells we need to send to the site. So we're going to send everything we can until the rest of the body can catch up and try to figure out what this cell is. So once we throw everything at this possible site, we're going to talk about 3 basic parts: vasodilation or vasodilation and increased permeability of blood vessels. All that means is we're going to cause the blood vessels, specifically the arterioles, to dilate. And what arterioles are? Smaller arteries, very small arteries. We're going to cause them to dilate, and because we're going to cause them to dilate, we're going to allow blood to flow through much faster at a much quicker pace. Things that would normally be in the blood that we would kind of hold off, we're going to push them out too. And what they're going to do is actually flow to the site. So it's almost like taking a cap off of the fire hydrant and letting everything push the fluids down that way, because in those fluids we're going to have things like white blood cells. We're going to have stuff called histamines, all kinds of different different cells and different mechanisms, prostaglandins, to kind of attack whatever is at the bottom of that wound, whatever is at the bottom of that injury. We want to try to see and stop it as quickly as we can. The second step is called emigration, and what that is the movement of phagocytes. So again, we go back to that word from chapter 3. And so we take the phagocytes from the blood and move it to the interstitial fluid. Remember, we were talking about extracellular fluid and intracellular fluid. So we want to move them to the site so they can take away all the bad bacteria, microbes that are present, and pretty much scoop them out. We want to eat them and kick it out. And of course, the last step would be tissue repair. So please watch this video. Very, very good video. Excellent, excellent video of showing you how all of it works. Next one. Name the 5 cardinal signs of inflammation. Very, very, very important. 5 signs of inflammation is redness, swelling, heat, pain, and loss of function. Anybody who's ever slammed their fingers in a car door, it is the worst feeling. The first thing that you will find out is that your finger, whether it be your thumb, usually the thumb is the most infamous one, the thumb turns extremely red, and then it starts swelling. And the reason that it starts swelling is because you have vasodilation. You think about how we just talked about everything becomes more permeable, and we're gonna push as much fluid as we can to that site as possible. So we're flushing everything out, everything that we got, we're throwing in the kitchen sink. So it's going to swell because of all that fluid moving. Once it starts to swell, it gets hot. I don't know if you've ever noticed that pain. After a while, it really starts getting hot, getting hot. Then of course pain. Pain is very, very good. Pain lets us know something is wrong, because if you did not feel the pain, then you wouldn't know anything was wrong. And then the last step would be the loss of function. After you slam that finger in that car door, you do not want to move that finger anymore. So you will say that there is a loss of function. You are barely going to move that at all. Well, that ends the review for chapter 5. If you have any questions, please send me an email. I will be checking them. Send me a text message. And hopefully I will see you all next week. I'm sure I will see you on Tuesday. I do not think that Thursday class will have lab after looking at the way that the weather does. So you all stay safe and warm.